Welcome to Stimulate Conversations, a sexual wellness business discussions podcast that supports the vast range of professionals supporting consumers from a business perspective within the sexual wellness space. My name is Nicole Lameck, your host, and the founder of Stimulate, a B2B sexual wellness trade show held annually in Nashville, as well as many other Stimulate experiences throughout the year. I'm also author of the book Retail 101 from McGraw-Hill and professor of retail marketing at Columbia, Chicago. From head to toe, young to mature, purpose to pleasure, Stimulate Conversations is committed to supporting sexual wellness professionals. Together with industry leaders as our guests, we look forward to delivering trusted and important conversations to help support retail, wholesale, spa, salon, and medical professionals who collectively want to help elevate and support their consumers within the sexual wellness community from an educated and professional perspective. Listeners of Stimulate Conversations can look forward to gaining expert-led insight from industry leaders, ranging from doctors to retail operational experts to industry visionaries and more. Without further ado, let's dive into Stimulate Conversations. Welcome to another edition of Stimulate Conversations, where I am so thrilled to welcome Dr. Evan Goldstein. Dr. Evan is nationally renowned for his private practice work at Bespoke Surgical that specializes in the elite standard of sexual health and wellness care in New York City. Additionally, Dr. Evan is the co-founder of Future Method, a science-backed sexual wellness products that are doctor-led and developed to deliver maximum pleasure, eliminate injury, and empower the way people choose to play. Welcome, Dr. Evan.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. You have such an immersive medical background and professional career in general. And I'd love to hear more about your professional work history.
Well, I actually started as a heart surgeon, which was kind of crazy. I went from the heart to the ass. I think they're both connected in some capacity. But I hated it. I was doing heart surgery. I was training. I came out a little bit later in life. I met my partner now of 18 years. We have 2 kids together. And I really started to look at myself first and say, am I happy with who I am, where my life is, and what I want to do? And then that really spawned to start my surgical practice, which was Bespoke Surgical. And I remember walking in Central Park with Andy, and I said, I think people care. People care who they're talking to professionally. People don't have access to this type of care. I think the world isn't at that time ready to talk about it. And how do we kind of look at community-based practice? And I think that that's what really allowed me to see a white space, not only in the medical side, the educational side, but then also obviously on the product side. And it was all looking specifically in the gay community, though we know everybody has an asshole and everybody engages anally. But you really start to kind of analyze within. I looked at me. Can I do X, Y, and Z? What do I want to do? And then is there the support on the medical side and the product side to allow me to do that? All the while creating an environment that's safe, that's destigmatizing, that doesn't care what you put up your butt, but also says, hey, how do we do it safely and responsively? And if we do have injury, how do we know the right place to go? And that just didn't exist. And that was what was so cool. To really kind of spearhead the bespoke surgical practice.
Yeah, I love that for so many reasons. First and foremost, because you gave such a safe but professional and a place, like you said, like welcoming, really community business, right? A medical office that welcomes anybody, primarily to say the gay community. I have one other question before we get too far in that I forget. By definition, what kind of doctor are you? You first started, heart surgeon was amazing to learn today. I did not know that, but I feel like you have so much heart to share that does not surprise me. But what is the
Yeah, so I was general surgical trained. So I trained in general surgery. And during that, I was in a facility in Brooklyn, which really gave access to everything, whether it was colorectal or whether it was plastics. And I really felt like this, what I needed to do, didn't exist and doesn't exist from a fellowship perspective. The standard is, are you pooping? And if you're pooping, it's a success. Well, no, that's not true. The success is, well, how does it function for what we're asking it to do beyond just the bathroom of, am I using the restroom? It's, do I engage the way I want to? Is it functioning correctly? Also, how does it look? So general surgical trained that built in the colorectal and the plastic side into it to say aesthetics are important. We want it to look great. We want it to function appropriately. And our real parameters of success are, what do you want to do sexually? What are your desires? Yeah. Where do you want it to go? And how do we now kind of put all the pieces together?
Which really encompasses a lot of what we try and do at Stimulate, which is combine purpose to pleasure. I mean, you're really doing that as well in your own way, of course. Purpose to pleasure, you're supporting a great community. And like you said, everybody does have a butthole, right? Like, and however, or asshole, however you might define it, it's like, and there is pleasure there, but there's also purpose there. So that's,
Totally
incredible place that you've been able to fill and really support. And I was so fortunate firsthand to have seen you speak in person this past July at Stimulate's Virgin Show, which took place in Nashville. As you know, you were one of our most popular speakers that we had at our event. So first of all, thank you for being part of our Virgin Show. And I have to tell you, you are an absolute attendee favorite. And
oh, thanks.
Yeah, it was amazing to see firsthand because you were just so giving of information that was valuable, but also a bit unexpected. And with that, felt so comfortable. And I think that's such a great part of who you are, is like you bring this level of comfort to, I would imagine, your patients. I've never been a patient of yours, but I would imagine your patients, of course, but anybody that you're with, just as you are right now. So if you had to give our listeners who were not there that day a snapshot of that presentation that you shared, what would you tell them?
I think it was really a lot of just defining where we are as a society and looking within, right? We know that people are engaging in anal sex. We know that when you look at all the parameters, whether it's Pornhub, whether it's, sales and Target and Dwayne Reed and CVS and Walgreens and all this, we see all the different brands trying to enter the sexual wellness space because we know that it is driven by success, right? And what we're looking to target. When we look at what I try to hold everybody accountable, because the bespoke surgical practice that I have sees the issues associated with communities engaging. And it's a lot of different communities, not only the gay, it's within the trans community, it's in the hetero community, it's in female to male, it's in they, them. There's all of these components, and all of them create different nuances in the way people engage. And so a lot of what we were talking about was to first just define anatomy in everybody. From an anal perspective, sex should not be that difficult, right? It is skin and it is muscle. There are 3 sets of muscles in everybody's butt, 2 of them that you control, 1 that you don't. And so if our listeners are listening and you squeeze your ass right now, you're squeezing 2 out of the 3. And the question is, how does the skin relax and accommodate whatever you're putting in? And how do the muscles do the same? And so a lot of what we were talking about was trying to really create people to understand that you can't go from nothing to something big, especially when you look at either female skin or trans male to female. When they're doing estrogen and spironolactones, what you're seeing is that the skin becomes quite thin. So a lot of people, through porn and through everything that we're exposed to, just feel like, yeah, let me just turn over and shove it in and I'll be fine. And the realistic picture is, no, we need to first define what our anatomy is within ourselves. And that's where we talk a lot about using toys And with Future Method, we came up with a dilating kit that really takes away the nuances of it and allows you to focus on, okay, can my muscles relax? Can my skin accommodate? What do I need to do to allow me to understand the stepwise progression? And a lot of it was then talking about the other ailments. People get tears or hemorrhoids, or the muscles and skin don't do what we're asking it to do. And what can you do or your consumers do at home? And I talk about consumers a lot, right? Because of Future Method, but thinking about everyone's first experience with anal. Think about how many consumers don't ever come back to anal because their experience was bad. And now it translates to, well, who's to blame? Is it the medical system? Is it the sexual education system? Is it your aisle where you sell these products, where you don't, and I can't be in everybody's aisle? And how do we now really make sure that everybody understands a set curriculum so that we're all speaking the same language? Because think about that person that won't go to anal again. That person that we lost could have been our best consumers and could have engaged really well in their sexual lives if they were to just tackle it with the right education and the right tools. So a lot of the Stimulate conversation was all about just thinking a little bit differently. I can't lay out everything for everybody, but it's taking it into my brain, which is saying, let's take a step back, looking what I see. I see the injuries. So now I work backwards from the injuries to figure out anatomy, functionality, obviously the aesthetics piece, and then putting the products into that to allow them to be successful.
Well, I certainly wish you could be in everyone's aisles, Dr. Evan. I think you would be really entertaining, but more so very educational. And, being in the aisles, I mean, as you know, Stimulate is an experience that connects businesses to brands. And those businesses are front facing to consumers. So you hit the nail on the head when you said that many consumers who are also, whether they're having solo sex, partner sex with, heterosexual, gay, trans, whoever it may be, their first experience may be something that took them backwards and never wanted to do it again. But had they been educated, like you said, things may be different. It would also probably bring them to more aisles of stores and businesses and medical offices, which I know also sell great products. And with that, I want to elaborate on both Future Method and why Future Method. I've already gathered, of course, and having spoken with you before, you just said you saw the problem, so you wanted to start backwards and help fix that and prepare. But for those listeners who are primarily businesses selling to consumers, what can you even suggest for them on, why bringing this conversation to them is important? Like, how do you do that, for example?
I think it all stemmed from the injuries that I was seeing more so with what's called anal fissures, which are tears, and the STD side of things. And yes, there's a lot more that goes into it. But in my mind, when I started to see people coming to me with STDs and tears, you start looking and saying, okay, how do we break sex into different buckets? The first bucket is, how are people preparing for sex? The second bucket is, how do people actually engage? What are we asking of that situation? And then what is the aftercare? And before I even started Future Method, I broke that into those three buckets, which is what we look at from a brand perspective. And we fit different products into, okay, we know that most people are douching with water. Is water safe? The answer is no. They're going to the aisles and they're going for enemas. Well, are enemas used for cleansing? No, they're really used for constipation. So I started to look and say, well, wait a second. If people are using water and people are using enemas, how much are they using? What are they using? What type of volume? What type of solutions? How many times are they doing that? And you start to kind of really look and say, well, wait a second. This guy or girl that's coming into the office with 3 to 4 STDs a year, what is that linked to? Is that linked to overdouching? Is it linked to improper use of the solution? What is that? And our first hero product was an anal douche solution because I started to see that the microbiome was negatively affected by either water or an enema. And I don't know, you look at it, you say, okay, it's the water, it's the volume, and it's how many times people are doing it. And when you start to look at that, you say, well, wait a second, they didn't even have sex yet, and they're already fucked in the wrong way. And you start to say, well, wait a second, why isn't there a product that is supportive, that allows people to feel clean? Because I'm not going to get rid of the phobia of, am I going to poop on my partner, or am I clean? And even if I tell people 9 times out of 10, if you're using fiber the right way, if you're using pre and probiotics, if you're using toys before to make sure that you're clean, 9 times out of 10, you don't need to clean out and douche, but people still do. So instead of saying, oh, yeah, use a condom, and 80% of gay men don't use condoms, you keep saying the same narrative. I say, well, wait a second, let's start a brand that's all about meeting the consumers where they are. Let's look at the science of sex. Let's really look at products that change outcomes. It's not just, hey, let's just white label everything that's already on it, but make it a nice box and put it on there and say, oh yeah, we're the greatest sexual wellness company in the world. You start to say, well, wait a second, every product that we have has a purpose for risk reduction. And the risk reduction is looking at communities and saying, what are your primary problems? How do we now look at the products that you are using or the way that you're engaging and figure out what products we can supplement that with to bring the risk down? I'm not going to bring risk down to zero, right? That's not, I would love that. We would all love that. But there's so many moving parts, from what are you douching with? What are you using? How much volume? What type of lubes are you using? What is your aftercare? But the thought process at Future Method is all about that. Any product translates back to better education, better outcomes, and more so just better sex through risk reduction.
Yeah, I love that. And your passion is so clear to see that you genuinely want to help people, like with that risk reduction of what you just said, and for them to enjoy themselves more and give them a healthy space to do so, a healthy understanding of how to do that individually, of course. So, my next question for you is actually going to be more brand focused, because you guys really embarked on a territory, so to speak, that was never embarked on before in a big way. I mean, I have walked into, various retailers and been very, very happy to see Future Method on the store shelves. And yet I know there's a million more store shelves that it can be introduced to. And so with that, kind of take me on that journey of what it's been like launching Future Method, which historically has never really existed anything like it, at least from my knowledge.
I think it started first with bespoke because it was an evolution, right? My surgical practice, I did a study very early on in my career where medicine is a referral based practice. So you break your butt, you call your primary doctor, he says, go to Evan, right? But if people aren't asking the right questions, if people don't feel comfortable, if they're not seeing medical practitioners that they are allowed to talk about their kinks and taboos and desires open and freely, I'm never going to see patients. And so early on in my career, even gay physicians, 90 to 92% of gay physicians don't ask their gay patients about their gay sex that they engage. So you start to say, well, wait a second, if I'm waiting for that doctor to ask the questions, I'm never going to see the patient. So where do people go? They go to Google, they go to Reddit, they go to all the social channels to really say, I broke my ass, or I've had sex and I'm bleeding, or I want to have sex, but I can't. So what is that? So very early on, I hired a MMLPR. Merritt and her team have been amazing for me, which is, how do we really look towards popular press? How do we start talking? And this was about 12 years ago, where we said, let's start talking about the issues. Me writing on Medium and talking about it, us doing social, but then let's really pitch it to Vogue and Cosmo and GQ and Men's Health and all of these places where I know anal is the final frontier of sex. Like, we know that. How do we make people feel comfortable? And how do we make the editors really understand our language, but yet feel safe that they're able to put it on their own shelves, right? And talk about these issues. And it was always this evolution. I knew I was going into products, but I couldn't just go into products without first spending the first 5 to 7 years debunking myths, looking at the landscape of understanding that women and women-centered publications talk 80% more than men publications on anal issues or sexual issues. And women are much more receptive to talking about the issues. And how do we do that? And again, it translates to just where we are as a brand, right? You learn from all of these interactions of what makes the most sense to push the right narratives. And then it translated very well into a complete white space as it relates to on future methods. So it's still a huge learning curve. Greg and my team and David, I mean, you look at social channels, we get, banned all the time, just talking about things. It's not equal specifically in the gay anal space. So we have to be really, really understanding of how do we market this, but how do we still push the narratives and stay true to the brand identity? It's not easy at all, but I love the fact of having these podcasts and talking with people and working with you at Stimulate and everybody that came to the show, and looking forward to the future shows, just simply because we're all on the same page, right? And we're all figuring out how do we kind of navigate this in the right way, but also making sure that we're holding everybody accountable, that we're also looking at the safety side of it. Just because, again, this is an unregulated space and there's a lot of room for error for lots of different companies.
Yeah, and I love that there's more and more doctor-founded companies or science-backed products being introduced in the marketplace. Just from a general perspective, I love that because it is, an important category of retail, but it's also a sensitive category of retail, right? There's sensitivity to it from a health side. So we have to be mindful of that, which just on a personal level, which is why I really applaud brands like yours with leaders like you behind them. And so one of the other things I really love is how you've been able to merge bespoke surgical and future method in some of your marketing efforts. And that's just by observation that I share that, because I follow you on Instagram and your handle is Dr. Evan Goldstein, correct?
Yeah, Dr. Evan Goldstein.
You are correct, Dr. Evan Goldstein. So for those of you listening, I share that, so you definitely want to follow him. But you have a really beautiful way of sharing insight as well as humor, as well as facts, as well as, advice. I think that you do a really great job. And like you said, it's not always easy because you might get taken down sometimes, you might get flagged. What advice would you have? Because again, we have a lot of business listeners who are within the sexual wellness category. What advice can you offer them when it comes to their own sharing of sexual wellness content in general?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it has to be what resonates with their consumer, right? And really doing the A/B testing and looking at forecasting and understanding all of these approaches to hitting the milestones that we all want to hit. What I do know is, having the bespoke surgical practice really brings a lot more insight into the issues that we're seeing, right? What I see in the office translates to across all brands, whether it's me, myself, whether it's Bespoke, the surgical brand, or whether it's the Future Methods side. And they're all intertwined. We have tried to kind of compartmentalize, but at the end of the day, it really all meshes to say, okay, the Bespoke is what are we seeing ailment wise, right? We're then looking at me personally to say, how do we mesh that with Evan living his life, having twin boys, and navigating this kind of interesting intersection of real world versus sexual world, and that colliding, right? And then the third of the product brand to say, okay, great, knowing that there is the risk, how do we look at this in a separate light to bring that reduction down? I think the key for me is really being authentic, I think it's really not shying away from tough discussions. You don't see the times where you have a discussion with someone and it didn't go the way that you anticipated. But I always say to my son, Sebastian, you learn more from the wrong than the right. And when you are working in this context and you make errors in judgment or you're calling wrong names, or there's nothing wrong with asking questions. There's nothing wrong with stating the fact of, I don't know. How do I make sure I'm representing correctly X, Y, and Z? And I think that that's what we really do authentically, is to not shy away from difficult conversations. And the reality is that people are going to engage the way that their desires. I always say that sex wins. I always say, especially in my space, the penis will find a way, the ass will find a way. And so with that, it's now saying, okay, if that's the case, how do we now make sure that they're armed with the right tools, whether it's education, access, and or products? I don't know. Did that answer the
It
question?
absolutely did. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I love that authenticity. Like you brought up your twin boys, and as a follower, I know you love music. I love that you shared the very human side of you and merge it into also like that professional side, for lack of better words, right? Like, because you earlier said that you guys try to make it in compartments, but ultimately it started to all blend together. And I can relate to that just in my own work as well. But I actually think that's a beautiful thing because the connectivity becomes very clear for your audience. In some ways, you're helping, at least from what I can see, avoid new patients. You're trying to prepare them to
yeah,
avoid seeing you ever, right? And of course,
totally.
things will happen that they're going to, some of them will eventually meet you. But
Yeah, and I
oh,
also think it's what's so cool about it is it starts to normalize all of these things. I'm gifted to be able to have kids. Think about 20, 30 years ago. I would never been in the same situation to be out and with partner and have kids and really normalize all of these things. It really is such a cool privilege. I talk about all the time, like we're the first out living gay community now. You look back in the days, everyone died of HIV, where this is a whole different world where we're able to kind of really start to take away this and be like, well, wait a second, define what normal is. That should be completely bullshit because there shouldn't be any definition of normal, right? It should be whatever. But it's understanding that we do need to kind of conform in some way to make sure that we are all normalizing the right conversations with everyone globally. So it's really kind of cool. It's really fun. I just find it fascinating. It's what gets me up every day.
I love that. And it's clear that you are an innovator. Your brand is innovative, Future Method. And the category of sexual wellness has a lot of great opportunity ahead. So I'm really curious what you think in terms of the future of this category and where we're headed from, a business brand side, but also maybe you want to switch gears and tell us where you think we're headed from a consumer side. Take it wherever you want, Dr. Evan. You're the innovator.
Well, I think that clearly this category is enormous. It's not only anal, it's all things sexual. I think that we're going to continue to see people entering the space and people leaving the space just because it is a difficult category to translate into where we want it to go. I think we'll see a lot more doctor-led and or scientific approaches. I think that we really need to start getting into a more of a curriculum based approach that people are following. I think that we really need to, everybody can call themselves a sexual expert. You don't need any formal training to do that. With that being said, I really think that we need to hold everyone accountable, that there should be standard of care that's met. We should have government oversight in what people are putting up any hole and or in. I think that there needs to be a lot more kind of really cross brand discussions on where everyone wants this to go, there needs to be a grading system for toys and or understanding that people are going to go right to the advanced hunk of meat that they think that they can shove up their ass, and realizing that that wasn't appropriate. And again, on a sale perspective, we've just lost that consumer that if we would have started in the right, components, they would have been a lifelong purchaser of X, Y, and Z. So I think it's trying to figure out how do we all kind of navigate that in the right way. And that's why we talked even at the Stimulate of holding the stores somewhat accountable to curate correctly with brands, curate really, obviously we want you to get the sale, but we also want it to be done in a very methodical approach, because that person is going to you for the education and the products to support that education. And if you're just going to a product that looks good from the outside and isn't looking at, well, how does it work with your anatomy? Is it appropriate for you? Is this an A, B, C, D for more advanced play? What are these things? And I think we're going to start to see more and more of that. Probably more so first on the consumers demanding that, the consumers saying, hey, well, wait a second, I want this, this, and this in this sequence. And I think that that's what's going to drive the other side of it. But I do hope on a retail perspective that we now are saying, well, wait a second, do we have a chief science officer that sees over all of these products that we're putting on the shelves? Because at the end of the day, there is a lot of harm that comes out of all of these aisles that we should all be looking at proactively and being a part of the next generation of, spaces.
You said so much good stuff there. My mind is kind of going in a million places, but I've never heard chief science officer before, but I have a feeling I'm going to hear a lot of that now. And I always think of you. You probably coined that, didn't you?
I think that that's where it starts to, and again, it's not to blame. I never blame anybody or any company and or brand. It's not that. It's saying, okay, how do we look forward?
Yep.
And if you're looking forward, you're seeing it. Before, we never saw antibiotics and or birth control and or abortions for over the counter, right? Now we're seeing that all of these things are starting to become more patient or consumer focused approaches. But the assumption is that there is education in that, right? And so with that being said, is how do we now start to say, okay, if we're giving the consumer more leeway in really developing their own algorithms and care, who is that chief science officer or that chief science approach to make sure? Because whoever's listening and whatever brands are doing that and or retail, you are going to be so ahead of the curve by curating an aisle that when someone walks down it, it's all about risk reduction and the answer as to why. Why are we doing that? And the newer generations, all they care about is the why effect. Why is this better for me? Why are these ingredients the best for me? Get rid of all the other stupid bullshit. What do we need to do to make sure my sex lives are amazing, but also that it allows me to get on with life and I never have to worry about A, B, C, and D. And anybody that does that moving forward, it's going to be a game changer.
That goes back to that curriculum that you mentioned earlier and what you think is so important. And I definitely couldn't agree more. It's one of the big reasons we brought Stimulate to life. It's one of the big reasons we brought Stimulate Educate to life as well, which is the conference component at our show, which you spoke at last year and you're speaking again in 2024. So I do want to make sure our listeners know that as well. And if you were a business right now, Dr. Evans, so let's pretend you're a med spa, a traditional spa, a retailer, maybe a boutique hotel, and you're exploring the idea of introducing sexual wellness products in general. And certainly we would hope Future Method would be among those, right? What would your advice be in terms of beginning to bring these products into store shelves where you can connect with consumers, particularly based off what you just said, knowing what the future you think is going to look like?
I think it's really just understanding who your consumer is in that retail space, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a cruise line, whatever that is, clearly, and it changes, right? And you need to really look and say, what are we as a brand, right? I break it up into the before sex, the during, and the after, and I think that that really translates quite well to what retail should be looking at. And for you to say, well, wait a second, if they're going to be in my hotel, what are they doing? Well, clearly a lot of people are having sex. And the question is, okay, well, what do we need to make sure that they have? Great, you have condoms. 80% of gay men don't use condoms. So then you start to say, what do they use? And you say, okay, well, they're going to clean themselves. Great. Do we have a douche that's there? Do we have an appropriate bulb? What about lube? Are they? Is it a huge gay population or an anal population that is engaging anally? Well, should we do more silicone-based lube because we know that silicone-based lube is better specifically for anal? And you start to kind of compartmentalize and allow you to bring those in. Again, looking at the way that people engage. Anal is a sale, right? It's not easy because again, it's still this kind of final frontier of, can I tap into this market? And I think it's really looking to say, hey, yes, people are engaging sexually. What are the things that we need to hit to make sure that they do it safely? And looking at the during, the before, the during, and the after. And with that is setting that stage for success. It's not just, get all these products and, there it goes. I think it's, again, curating that in a really great way. I don't know if you ever were able to look at Contact Sports in New
I
York
did
City. And
less.
I think again, I think it's
Beautiful.
people want higher end. People want kind of, it doesn't have to be crazy expensive products, but they just want the experience of feeling sexy. How do I look at specifically cleansing anally and or an anal act and feel really ready for that, and have the products to support that? And like, if I'm going into a hotel and I see that they have, an anal douche solution, silicone based lube, they have condoms, they have this, clearly we know that people are thinking of saying, okay, how do our consumers engage? And how do I make sure that I hit something in each category? And then testing those markets to see what really sells and what doesn't. And then, making it happen from there. I think that there's so much that's out there right now. And so many cool things, not only from our brand, from so many brands, that if it's curated correctly, you would be like, wow, these people are really thinking along the lines of what I as a person really needs. And that personalized approach goes through Bespoke, it goes through Future Method, and so many other brands. I think it really resonates. It just, again, adds that comfort zone to the consumer.
And I will add, just echoing everything you just said, that giving your frontline employees, as well as your leadership, such as your buyers and management, the opportunity to learn about the product so that they can't just, they're curating, but they're also communicating effectively. And that, in my opinion, comes from listening and learning from leaders like yourself within sexual wellness, joining us at Stimulate, where leaders, again, like you will be, because that's going to make a huge difference in how they can connect to the consumer. So, one of the things we always do here on Stimulate Conversations, Dr. Evans, is we take the time to ask a rapid fire few questions, which are just 5
Sure.
questions, some answers. But before we do that, I want to make sure our listeners know how to get in touch with you. So if you could share
Sure.
all the places that they might be able to do that, can you please do that?
Yeah, sure. So personally, it's Dr. Evan Goldstein. That's my handle. And obviously, drevangoldstein.com. For Bespoke, it's Bespoke Surgical on all different handles. Future Method, it's futuremethod.com. And then it's The Future Method on Instagram. And all of them, DM, email, all that stuff is accessible. And if there's obviously any questions or comments or anything, we're super open to anything.
I love it. I definitely recommend everyone following all of those. I know I'm personally learning things all the time from you, so thank you. And with that, let's go into our rapid fire questions. All right. The first one is, what does sexual wellness mean to you?
I think it's bringing science into sex. For me, it's how do we take all of the ownership of our roles and provide the consumers with not only the safest risk reducing product, but the education to support successful engagement.
Love that. And how do you define good customer service?
Oh my God, it's like there's so many facets of successful interfacing, right? Especially now it's getting so complicated with all the different mediums to do that. But, through proper product displays, descriptions, being supportive, and really bringing the scientific sexual education. Obviously, it's access to the brand, similar to bespoke. It's like I want people to always have access. Everyone gets my email. You're entering a space that's more comforting and destigmatizing and bringing down the taboo and really putting front and center our overarching mission. And then, of course, it's timely communications. Everything right now is like, how do we get answers, right?
Yeah.
And it's curating that in the right way so that the customer service speaks volumes to what all the different brands provide.
Love that. And what about personally? What keeps you inspired?
I think my children, my kids, obviously we spoke before, I'm so blessed that we're all in this modern world where I get to experience raising children. Their questions, their curiosities allow me to take a step back and kind of like grow up again in a different way that then translates just to the care that we provide, the products, and really looking at it in a different light. So I would say they personally inspire me.
I love that. I could agree with that as well. And what about professionally? What keeps you professionally inspired?
I think it's the private practice that I have. The private practice is you're not only seeing the positive changes that we orchestrate from me doing surgeries and or Botox and all these other things in the office, but it's also like much more of what we need to accomplish. When you look at community-based practices, it's ever changing, it's evolving. You look at the PrEP, which is the anti-HIV. Well, that wasn't 20 years ago. And so now you start to see all different sets of problems that arise. So and it's the same thing in the retail world. You solve one problem and now it brings two other problems with it. And you start to kind of have to think differently, right? It's like, how do we look at small things that impact on a grand global scale? And I always say, like, you solve one and there's more to come, literally more to come,
Yeah.
with that. And it should be that grind in a really good way that just allows you to be positively reinforced through whatever we're doing globally.
Love that. And what about your best advice for business leaders of any category?
Yeah. I think it's really, I say all the time, it's very hard to be the best at many things.
Mhm.
I think that one of the things I am a firm believer that the best surgeon in the world deals with the same shit day in and day out. If someone's just doing general things, they're just good at all things. They're not fucking great, right? And so when you're looking at, brands, when you're looking at your mission, when you're looking at your businesses, I think you want to get fucking amazing. And by staying true to that mission, canceling out all this negative. Everybody's a hater. No one believes in what you're doing. There's so much noise of this negativity. Canceling that out as best as you can and continuing to focus on all of the issues that we're speaking about, but staying true to that. Because if you define that and you stay true to that, I think that's where we become the best versus saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm doing all of these things. Yes, you may go down the line and change the mission to add other categories. But in the beginning, staying focused, I think from a business perspective, is what you see all of the best brands continuously navigate and go back to. They may deviate and they're like, fuck no, bring this back
Right.
to what our core is and define that really well.
Yeah, knowing what you do well, knowing what you don't. It's amazing advice. So I can't thank you enough because everything you said today was so valuable. I have a feeling it's going to be one of those repeat episodes that I know myself will want to listen to again, our listeners are going to want to listen to again. And the great news is you'll be joining us again at Stimulate in Nashville this upcoming August 5th and 6th as a main stage presenter, as well as part of our Ask the Doctors, which is a new section of our Stimulate show. So we're very excited for that. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. This was great. Can't wait to continue the Stimulate world.
Yay, love it. And thank you as well to our listeners for tuning in. You can find us, as always, on Spotify, on YouTube, and many more places where Stimulate conversations can be shared. Thank you, Dr. Evan.
Thank you.
Stimulate Conversations offers year-round ways to stay in touch between our podcasts, including a private Facebook community for ongoing and more in-depth discussions, which you can find via Facebook at the group name Stimulate, Sexual Wellness Business Discussions. You can also stay connected via Instagram at the handle Stimulate the Show. And you're welcome to email us at stimulate@retailminded.com. I'm Nicole Leinbach, founder of Stimulate and your host. And together with the entire Stimulate team, we look forward to continued discussions that will, you guessed it, keep you stimulated on the business of sexual wellness. Till next time, stay stimulated.